He said it like it wasn't the first time. And for a second, I forgot how old I really was. Isn't that strange? How just one sentence, spoken low, almost like a secret, can tear through years of silence. I'd spent so long being invisible. Not because anyone told me I was, but because over time, you just start to fade. You stop catching glances. You stop imagining what if. You stop remembering what your own skin feels like to someone else. But that night, the way he said it, not like I was some antique to be admired from a distance. Not like I was someone's mother or grandmother or charity case. No, it was quiet. Intentional. Like a match striking inside a dark room. He said, "You feel that too, don't you?" And I didn't say anything back. I didn't need to, because I did. And for the first time in years, I let it happen. I let myself feel something. Before we begin, if you've been here before, if you've ever found yourself staring at someone a little too long, if you've ever stayed quiet when your body screamed otherwise, then you already know. This isn't about age. It's about that single, dangerous moment. The one where you stop pretending you don't want something and start asking what if. This is the story of what happened when I said yes to that question. Not out loud, just in my heart. And once I did, nothing about my life ever felt the same again. The guest house was small, just enough space to disappear into. It sat at the edge of a quiet coastal town where the ocean didn't shout, it whispered. The kind of place where the days stretched slow and nothing needed fixing unless it was falling apart completely. I'd chosen it on purpose. Not for the view, not for the charm, but because it felt forgotten. Like me. The first morning I woke there, the light was already pouring in, soft and golden, like melted honey slipping through the cracks in the wooden shutters. I remember how it caught the edge of the old wicker chair by the window. I sat there, still in the nightgown I'd been wearing for what felt like days, letting the sun do what no one else had done in years, touch me. The floors creaked, but not in a haunting way. More like the house was sighing around me. And the smell. There was always this faint mix of things. Salt from the ocean, old lavender embedded in the cushions, and something deeper, sandalwood, maybe. Like a memory that clung to the air long after someone left. I spent the first few days mostly in silence. No schedule. No obligations. Just me. The sound of the waves in the distance, and the occasional scratch of a pen across paper when I tried, unsuccessfully, to write something meaningful in my journal. But I wasn't there to write. Not really. I was there to vanish. After retiring, after the last guest left the party, after the last child moved on, I realized I didn't know who I was when no one needed anything from me. And the truth? That scared me more than getting old ever did. It was on the fourth afternoon when I heard them. Footsteps. A burst of laughter. The squeak of the main house's old screen door swinging open. I remember freezing, hand halfway to my teacup, and turning my head slightly, just enough to see them through the trees. A group of them. Young, carefree in that effortless, untouchable kind of way. They were dragging easels and canvases and paint-stained bags into the big house next door, the main house, which was rented out for artist retreats. I'd forgotten it was even listed that way. I watched from my porch. Quiet. Still. It felt like watching birds. Something beautiful, but distant. Like you don't want to disturb them because you're sure they'll fly away the second you do. But then, one of them looked back. Just a glance at first. He had something in his hands, maybe brushes or a sketch pad. I couldn't tell. But he paused, just slightly, and tilted his head like he was trying to place me. I looked away too fast. Heart racing for no good reason. I remember thinking, you're 70, not 17. Stop acting like you've been caught sneaking glances at the school heartthrob. But something about that look. It didn't feel mocking. It didn't even feel curious. It felt like recognition. And that made me ache in a place I hadn't felt in so long, I almost forgot it was there. The days that followed, I tried not to pay attention. But I did. I listened when they played music in the evenings. I noticed the way they danced barefoot in the yard under string lights that hung crooked and low. I told myself I was only watching because I had nothing else to do. But that wasn't true. There was life over there. Laughter, movement, color. And somewhere in the middle of it all was him. Tall, disheveled in that deliberate kind of way. He always had graphite on his fingers and shirts that hung a little loose like he didn't care what fit. He didn't just look young. He looked alive. And for some reason, he kept looking my way. Not all the time. Not in a way that felt staged or showy. But in these stolen, quiet moments when no one else was watching. I hadn't come to that place looking for anyone. Certainly not him. But that's the thing about stillness. If you sit in it long enough, you start to hear things. And I was starting to hear something. A part of me I thought had gone quiet for good was stirring. And in that quiet little house by the sea, as the wind played with the chimes and the smell of paint began to drift through my window, I started to wonder, what if I didn't disappear just yet? It was the next afternoon. The sky had turned pale, almost white, and the ocean was flat and silver like glass cooled too quickly. I'd just come in from hanging sheets on the line when I heard footsteps on the gravel path. Not the careless kind, these were slower. Purposeful. I didn't look right away. Something in me already knew. And sure enough, when I turned, there he was. He was holding a sketchbook, edges worn soft and corners curled. His jeans were stained with charcoal, and his shirt was only half-tucked, like he'd gotten distracted halfway through dressing. There was a looseness to him. Like he moved through the world without ever bracing for it. And then he smiled. Soft, not arrogant, not flirtatious. Just warm, like he saw something in me worth smiling at. "Would you sit for me?" he asked. Just like that. No build-up. No preamble. Just, "Would you sit for me?" I think I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I didn't know what else to do. The sound came out brittle, too sharp against the air. I wiped my hands on my skirt, trying to hide how they trembled. I'm hardly what you'd call a model," I said, meaning it as a joke. But he didn't laugh. He just looked at me and said, "I'm not looking for a model. I'm looking for someone real." And right there, something cracked open in me. Not because he said it, but because I believed him. Still, I didn't answer. Not right away. Because everything in me, the part that had learned how to stay small, how to be polite, how to age gracefully and quietly, screamed no. I should have said no. What would people think? What would he think? But he didn't ask for forever. He asked for a moment. And in that moment, I couldn't remember the last time someone had asked anything of me that didn't involve errands, favors, or dinner reservations. He didn't look away. Didn't try to fill the silence. He just waited. There was no pressure in it. No expectation. Only an invitation. I felt my heart beat a little faster, tight in my chest like I'd just remembered something important. Something I'd left behind years ago in some attic or drawer I never meant to open again. So I said, "All right, one moment." I went inside and brushed my hair for the first time in days. Changed my blouse. Sat by the window with the light behind me. I didn't know where to put my hands. Didn't know how to hold my shoulders. He didn't tell me what to do. He just looked. And sketched. The only sound was the drag of pencil across paper and the wind shifting through the trees outside. At one point he asked, "Is this okay?" And I nodded, unable to speak. Because it was more than okay. It was terrifying. It was electric. It was mine. And as I sat there, completely still, completely seen, I realized. He wasn't drawing my body. He was drawing my presence. And I hadn't felt present in years. I thought about all the things I'd been told about aging. How women like me were meant to fade. To shrink. To be graceful, yes. But invisible. And yet, here he was. Looking at me like I was the most visible thing in the room. When he finished, he didn't show me the sketch. He just closed the book, tucked his pencil behind his ear, and said, "Thank you." Then he walked away. No lingering. No promises. Just that. But after he left, I couldn't sit still. Something inside me was buzzing, loud, and insistent. I tried to go back to what I was doing, folding laundry, watering the herbs, but everything felt different. Like the air had shifted. Like I had. Not because of a man, but because someone had looked at me and seen more. And that was the beginning of everything. The next day, it rained again. Not the soft, polite kind, but heavy, urgent, like the sky had something to confess. I stayed indoors most of the morning, sipping tea that had long since gone cold, staring at the water streaking down the glass. I wasn't expecting him. I told myself that. Repeated it. And yet when I heard the knock on my door, my breath caught like I'd been waiting the whole time. He didn't say much, just smiled, held the sketchbook again under his arm, and asked if I'd like to sit again. Only this time, would I mind coming to the main house? I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to go, but because I did. And wanting something at my age, openly, selfishly, felt almost dangerous. But I nodded, quietly. I didn't grab a jacket. Didn't fix my hair. Just followed him. The path to the main house curved along a row of low hedges, still damp and fragrant from the storm. The gravel crunched beneath our steps, but neither of us spoke. He walked ahead, not far, but far enough that I could watch him move, easy, unguarded. When we reached the back, he pushed open a wide wooden door, and that's when I saw it, the sunroom. Tall windows lined 3 sides, smudged faintly with salt and rain. Light spilled in golden and thick, catching in the dust that swirled lazily through the air. Plants crowded the corners, overgrown ferns, a hanging ivy that had twisted itself halfway across the ceiling. It was beautiful in that unplanned, lived-in way. And warm. God, it was warm. He motioned toward an old wicker chair near the far end, draped in a faded blue blanket. I sat without a word, tucking my hands in my lap like I didn't quite know what to do with them. He didn't ask me to pose. Didn't give me direction. He just opened the sketchbook again and started to draw. For a long while, that was it. Just the scratch of pencil and the way the light kept shifting on the floor. I glanced at him now and then, not too directly. But I watched his hands. The way they moved, steady, unhurried. He had this gentleness. Not timid, not cautious, but attuned. Like he was listening with more than his ears. Like he could feel the weight of a moment without needing to fill it. Every so often, his gaze would lift to meet mine, just briefly. And there was no judgment in it. No surprise. No effort to smooth my edges or explain them away. He looked at me like I was real. Not an idea. Not a ghost. Not a memory of who I used to be. Just me. Right now. And sitting there, in that light, in that quiet, I felt more present than I had in years. Not because I was trying to be, but because I'd finally stopped trying not to be. I didn't ask what he saw when he looked at me. Maybe I didn't want to know. Maybe I already did. There's something terrifying about being seen. Really seen. Not for the roles you play, not for how well you hide your longing, but for the parts you thought had withered away. I felt raw, exposed. And still, I didn't want to leave. At some point, he rose and walked to the small table in the corner, poured us both glasses of water. His hand brushed mine when he passed it to me, barely a touch. Barely anything. But it sent a shiver through me, quiet and undeniable. I think he felt it too. He didn't mention it. He just sat back down, flipped to a new page, and began again. There was a small speaker tucked into one shelf, and without saying anything, he tapped his phone, and a soft melody drifted through the room. Something acoustic. Raw. Wordless. Like someone humming a secret only they knew. And I sat there still, watching the way the light hit his jaw, the curve of his mouth when he concentrated, the way his fingers smudged the graphite to shape the hollows of my collarbone. He wasn't drawing me to flatter. He wasn't drawing me to charm. He was drawing me because something in him wanted to remember how I looked, how I felt, in that moment. And I let him. Isn't it strange how sometimes it's the silence that changes everything? Not the words, not the touch. Just being near someone who doesn't need to fill the gaps. Who makes space for you to just exist? And in that space, I started to remember a version of myself I hadn't seen in decades. The woman I'd packed away in favor of being responsible, appropriate, faithful. That word rang in my chest like a bell I hadn't heard in a while. I didn't push it away, but I didn't invite it closer either. Not yet. The sun had shifted by the time the first one wandered in. A young woman, barefoot, wrapped in a sweater too big for her, pushed the door open with her shoulder, balancing a ceramic mug in both hands. She paused when she saw me sitting there. Her eyes flicked from me to him, then back again. She didn't smile. Didn't frown either. Just noticed. She walked past without a word, settled herself in the corner with a sketchpad of her own, and began to draw. And just like that, the room began to fill in around me. One after another, they drifted through, like tidewater sneaking back over dry sand. A soft knock, a creaking floorboard, the sound of someone setting down a glass too gently. None of them said why they were there. None of them asked who I was. And somehow, that silence made it feel even more intimate. One man, slim, wiry, with a buzz cut and charcoal-stained fingertips, paused by the entryway, met my eyes and tilted his head. "Tea?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. Not because I was thirsty, but because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. He returned a minute later, handed me the mug, chipped at the rim, still warm, and moved on without another word. It was surreal. I wasn't a guest. Wasn't a stranger, either. I felt like a ghost someone had remembered to look at. Like I'd slipped through some hidden door in time and found a version of myself I didn't think still existed. Pause, thoughtful. I looked at their faces, these artists, these drifters, these sun-drenched souls with ink on their arms and music in their pockets, and I couldn't help but wonder. Were they mocking me? Was this a joke I wasn't in on? Or was it just kindness without explanation? Had I forgotten what it felt like to be curious about someone without needing a reason? Or worse, was I imagining all of this? She draws in a breath. He didn't speak much that first day. But the next morning, he returned. Knocked once on the glass pane of my porch door and held up the sketchbook, like a question without words. I followed him again. This time, the room was empty when we entered. No music. No distractions. Just that honeyed light, curling around the corners like it had missed us. He asked if I'd like to sit. I nodded. We didn't say anything else. He began to draw. Again. And again. The day after that. It became our rhythm, unspoken, tender. He'd appear. I'd go. We'd sit in the quiet hum of that sunroom and exist, side by side, like two secrets trying not to speak too loudly. He never flirted, never made a move, but his eyes stayed longer than they should have. Not boldly, not possessively, just long enough to feel like he saw more than he should. Long enough to make me forget how careful I'd spent my life being. There was a moment on the third day when I looked up and caught him staring before his pencil even touched the page. And in that pause, before he looked away, I swear I felt something shift. Not between us. In me. It wasn't desire, not exactly. It was recognition. Of hunger. Of attention. Of being studied not as a novelty, but as something worth seeing. And somehow, that was even more dangerous. Because I wasn't used to being looked at like that. I was used to being respected. Admired. Even loved. In the dutiful, ceremonial way long marriages often teach you to love. But not this. Not quiet reverence. Not the ache of being held in someone's gaze like you mattered in a way that couldn't be said out loud. It scared me. It thrilled me. And worst of all, it made me feel something I hadn't felt in years. Possible. Like there was a whole version of my life that hadn't been written yet. And he, this messy, kind-eyed, barely older than my grandson boy, was sketching the first page of it without even knowing. It was just after sunset. The sky still held that lavender hue, like it hadn't quite decided to let go of the day. The sea was louder than usual, waves slapping the cliffs like they were trying to crawl higher, angrier. Or maybe just lonelier. I liked to walk that path near the edge. I told myself it was for the view, for the peace. But if I'm honest, I think I went there because it made me feel small. And sometimes being small is the only way to feel safe when you've carried too much for too long. I had a scarf around my shoulders, a gift from my daughter years ago. Soft, threadbare, smelled like cedar and rosewater from my old drawers. The wind tugged at it as I walked, playful one moment, ruthless the next. I gripped the ends tightly, but a sudden gust caught it just right, yanked it from my hands and sent it spinning down the path behind me. I turned, breath caught, already mourning it, and there he was. He hadn't been there a moment ago. I swear he hadn't. But somehow he'd appeared. Running. Fast. Focused. He caught the scarf midair, just before it could tumble over the edge. When he handed it back, our fingers touched. That kind of touch that wasn't about the skin. It was about presence. Not a brush. Not a bump. Just stillness. He didn't step back. And I didn't either. I could hear the wind. The sea. My heartbeat. He looked at me, and for the first time, there was no polite smile. No artistic curiosity. No filter. Just him. And me. Standing too close to pretend we didn't know what this was anymore. Then he said it. So softly I almost didn't catch it over the roar of the water. You can still leave, you know. He didn't say it like a dare. He said it like a gift. Like the door was open both ways. And suddenly I couldn't breathe. I should've. I could've. I could've smiled and walked away. Laughed it off. Told him he was sweet. Too young. Too bold. Too everything I wasn't. But something about standing there with him. It didn't feel like danger. It felt like being seen. Fully. Completely. Without needing to explain why the lines on my face didn't scare him. Without having to apologize for the years I'd lived through. We stood there in that pause, neither of us moving, like the world had stopped spinning just long enough to let me decide. No promises. No demands. Just that moment. And in that moment, I let the silence say what I couldn't. He raised one hand slowly. Not to touch me. To ask. His fingertips hovered near my cheek, waiting. And I didn't nod. Didn't speak. I just didn't move away. And that was all the answer he needed. His fingers brushed the side of my face, featherlight. Tracing the line of my jaw, like he was learning a language written in skin. I let my eyes fall closed. Not out of fear. Out of surrender. That's what it felt like. Not seduction. Not guilt. Just surrender. To the knowing. To the ache that had curled inside me for years, unspoken, unacknowledged. To the unbearable beauty of someone choosing to touch you, not in spite of who you are, but because of it. When I opened my eyes again, he was still watching me. Not hungry. Not rushed. Just present. His hand lowered. He stepped back then, just an inch. But the air between us had changed. It wasn't heavy. It wasn't even tense. It was sacred. Like the space between two stars that almost touched, but never had to. I turned to walk back. He didn't follow. And yet all the way home, I could still feel him. Not his hand. Not his body. Just his yes. Waiting quietly. Respectfully. Unshaken. We never talked about it. That night on the cliffs. No one said what had almost happened or what had already begun. But things changed. Subtly. Quietly. Like something underneath the surface had cracked open, and neither of us wanted to look directly at the light spilling out. He started coming by earlier in the mornings. At first, it was simple, coffee left at my doorstep, still steaming, with a little note scribbled in pencil on the back of a torn sketch. Thought of you, one said. Another, the sea's wild today. You'd love it. I started leaving my door open. Not fully, just unlocked. We'd walk sometimes, just past sunrise, before the others woke. No talking, just steps. Rhythmic. Like our bodies already knew how to move in sync before our mouths ever dared to speak the truth. The wind would lift his curls, and I'd catch myself looking longer than I should. And sometimes, just sometimes, he'd glance back, and I'd wonder if I'd ever been this seen by a man who hadn't lived through the same decades I had. We didn't touch. Not yet. But there was something about the way he stood close. Not invading. Just available. Available in a way that made my chest ache. Like all the years I'd spent being needed, as a wife, a mother, a professional, had left me forgetting what it meant to simply be wanted. One night, it rained. A slow, steady downpour, the kind that blankets everything in softness. He invited me over for tea. Said the others were out in town, that the house would be quiet. And it was. The windows steamed up quickly from the kettle. The walls glowed gold from a single lamp near the record player. He didn't offer explanations, didn't ask anything from me. Just put on an old jazz record, one of those grainy, crackling kinds that make the air feel thicker. I stood by the window, holding my cup, watching the raindrops race each other. He leaned against the far wall, watching me. Then, quietly, gently, he walked over and reached for my hand. Dance with me? His voice was softer than I'd ever heard it. I laughed. Reflexively. Nervously. I don't remember how, I whispered. He didn't answer. Just waited. So, I put my cup down, slipped off my shoes, stepped barefoot onto the old wood floor, and let him take my hand. It wasn't dancing, not really. It was swaying, breathing, moving like we were trying not to wake something. His hand slid to my waist, not possessive, just steady. Mine found his shoulder, and for a moment, I remembered what it felt like to be held, not handled. The music rose, faded, and still we moved. At one point, he brushed a loose strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers lingered just long enough to make my lungs freeze. My eyes closed, not to escape, to feel. Every breath between us, every inch of space we weren't crossing yet. The room felt suspended, like time had agreed to give us this one moment, free of consequence. No kiss, no lines crossed, just this nearness. This unbearable, exquisite almost. And in that almost, I felt more alive than I had in years. Because sometimes it's not the kiss, not the bed, not the act. Sometimes it's the pause before, the look across a room, the music you don't recognize because your heartbeat is too loud, the brush of a hand that says I see you and I want nothing from you but your yes. I didn't say yes that night, but I didn't let go either. And when the record ended and the silence crept back in, we stood there, still swaying, no music, no words. Just two people holding a question between them, waiting, letting it breathe. Letting it matter. The fire was already lit when we returned to the guest house. He didn't say much, just walked beside me. The kind of silence that didn't need filling, like even our thoughts had agreed to keep their voices down. I made tea. Again. Because when you don't know what else to do, you make something warm. Something with steam and scent and ritual. He sat on the rug, near the fire. Legs crossed. Elbows on knees. His body looked so young, and yet, the way he sat there, watching the flames like they were telling him secrets, that part of him felt older, familiar. I sat behind him, on the couch, quietly. I hadn't planned to touch him, but he leaned back, just a little, so I let my fingers drift to his hair. At first, it felt strange. Foreign, not because of him, because of me. Because I hadn't been this person in so long, the one who offers comfort, who runs her fingers slowly, intimately, through someone's hair without urgency, without obligation, just presence. He let his head rest in my lap, and I didn't flinch, didn't freeze. I just stayed. The fire crackled, and every few minutes, he'd shift slightly, his back pressing closer against the couch, the weight of him sinking into me. His body was warm. His breath was slow. My hand moved in quiet, repetitive circles, stroking through his curls, tracing the shell of his ear, brushing gently at the nape of his neck. A gesture I hadn't made in decades. Not since. Well, that's the thing, isn't it? I had been a wife. A good one, if anyone asked. Dependable. Predictable. Loyal. But I couldn't remember the last time I'd been touched without it meaning something I had to earn. Or return. Or explain. And here he was, curled beside me. Not asking. Not needing. Just letting me be here. After a while, he spoke. Quietly. You don't have to be anyone here. I didn't answer right away. The fire hissed, shifting under its own weight. I kept stroking his hair. And then, softly. I'm not sure who I am anymore. There. I said it. Not as a confession. Not even as a complaint. Just a truth. A small, sad, heavy truth that had been waiting years to escape the polite smile I wore in public. He turned his head slightly, looked up at me from my lap. His eyes weren't searching for answers, just acknowledging the weight of mine. And then he said, "Then let's find out." That's when it happened. Not a kiss. Not a line crossed. Something quieter. Something that left my throat tight and my chest open all at once. Something I hadn't felt since before my skin began to wrinkle and my hair turned silver and my hands stopped being touched unless they were needed for something. He stayed there. And I stayed with him. The crackle of the fire. The warmth of his shoulder against my thigh. The gentle repetition of my fingers through his hair like a hymn I hadn't sung in years. It wasn't about youth. Or desire. Or fantasy. It was about remembering that I could still be held. That I could hold, too. That intimacy didn't need to be loud to be real. Didn't need to be claimed to be felt. I had spent so many years believing my body was something to apologize for. Something once beautiful, now neutral. Or worse, invisible. But in that moment, in that soft, fire-lit silence, I was a place someone wanted to rest. I was safe. And I was seen. He fell asleep like that, eventually. Just breathing. Just warm. His arm slid across my leg. My palm cupped the back of his neck. I stared at the flames, too full to cry. Too awake to sleep. Something in me had softened. Not snapped. Not surrendered. Softened. I didn't know where this was going. Didn't need to. Sometimes the moment is the meaning. And in that moment, I was still a woman. Still here. Still capable of being loved, not because of what I gave, but because of who I was when no one needed anything from me. And for the first time in a long, long while, that was enough. So tell me, what did you feel when he caught her scarf? When their fingers touched and neither one moved? When he looked at her, not like a boy playing pretend, but like a man who saw past her years, straight into something still burning? Did it stir something? Something you tucked away? Have you ever been seen like that? When you thought no one was looking anymore? When you'd gone quiet inside, thinking that part of you had finished speaking? Have you ever stood still, not saying yes, not saying no? Just staying? Sometimes that's the loudest answer we ever give. And maybe you're here now, not for the ending, but for the echo it left in you. Maybe you've been here before. With someone. Or with yourself. And maybe, just maybe, you needed to be reminded that even the softest parts of you are still alive. So, if this story moved you, even in a small way, tell me, quietly, in the comments, or not at all. You can just sit here with me a while. Let it settle. Let it breathe. There's more where this came from. We don't tell stories for everyone. Just for the ones who still feel things. Deeply. This is Passionate Tales Unfold. And you're exactly where you're meant to be. Stay close. There's another story waiting for you. Just around the corner. And next time, you might not be just listening. You might be remembering. Or healing. Or awakening. Until then, be gentle with the parts of you that still want. And don't rush away. Not just yet.